After a young girl shows kindness to a stray pitbull, the dog returns and performs an act that leaves her family and neighbors stunned. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees as Emily swung lazily on her backyard swing set. At 8 years old, she had already developed a reputation in the neighborhood as the girl who could befriend any stray animal that wandered into their quiet suburban street. Her father often joked that she was like a Disney princess, minus the singing. That Wednesday afternoon started like any other. Emily had finished her homework early, earning herself some precious outdoor time before dinner. The setting sun cast long shadows across her family's well-maintained lawn, and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves. She was planning what to name her next imaginary pet when a low, pained growl caught her attention. The sound came from behind their white picket fence. Emily's feet dragged in the dirt, stopping her swing. Most children would have run inside, but Emily's curiosity always outweighed her fear. She approached the fence carefully, her sneakers crunching against fallen leaves. Another growl, softer this time, followed by what sounded like labored breathing. Emily reached the gate and peered through the slats. There, huddled against the fence, was a pitbull. The dog's ribs showed through his gray coat, and his eyes held a mixture of wariness and exhaustion. Despite his intimidating breed, Emily noticed how he tried to make himself appear smaller, pressing against the fence as if hoping to disappear. "Hey there," Emily whispered, keeping her voice steady like she'd learned from watching animal rescue videos online. The dog's ears perked up, but he remained still. Emily could see he had no collar, and patches of his fur were missing, revealing skin that had faced the elements for too long. She glanced back at her house. Her mother was inside preparing dinner, and her father wouldn't be home from work for another hour. The family rules were clear: no approaching stray animals without adult supervision. But something about this dog's eyes told Emily he needed help now. Moving slowly, she unlatched the gate. The hinges creaked slightly, causing the pitbull to flinch. "It's okay," Emily cooed. "I won't hurt you." She remembered the sandwich she had saved from lunch, still wrapped in her jacket pocket. With deliberate movements, she unwrapped it and placed half on the ground, then stepped back. The dog's nose twitched. He watched Emily for several long moments before hunger won over caution. He approached the food with halting steps, never taking his eyes off her. As he ate, Emily noticed a small scar above his right eye, and how, despite his condition, he ate gently, not wolfing down the food like most strays would. "I'll call you Max," Emily decided, the name coming to her naturally. Something about him reminded her of her cousin Max, who always tried to act tough, but was actually the gentlest person she knew. The dog's ears twitched at the name, and for a moment, Emily could have sworn he understood. She snuck into the garage and filled an old bowl with water. Bringing it back to Max, he accepted this offering more readily than the first, lapping up the water with obvious relief. As he drank, Emily slowly sat down on the grass, maintaining the distance between them. "You can stay here if you want," she told him. "I'll take care of you." Max finished drinking and looked at her with those intelligent eyes. Then, very slowly, he took a step toward her. Emily held her breath as he came closer, eventually settling down just within arm's reach. She didn't try to pet him, understanding that trust needed to be earned. They sat together as the sun continued its descent, sharing a moment of peaceful connection. Emily talked softly about her day at school, about her dream of becoming a veterinarian, and about how lonely she sometimes felt being an only child. Max listened, occasionally tilting his head as if following her words. What Emily couldn't know then was how this simple act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her life but the entire community. She couldn't know that Max's appearance wasn't just a coincidence, or that the very next morning he would lead her to a discovery that would shake their small town to its core. As darkness approached and her mother's voice called her in for dinner, Emily reluctantly stood up, "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked Max. The dog watched her with those knowing eyes, but didn't move from his spot. Emily left the remaining half of her sandwich and closed the gate behind her, hoping she hadn't imagined the connection she'd felt. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Max. She didn't know that at that very moment, Max was already fulfilling his true purpose, embarking on a mission that would reveal why he had really appeared in their small town. The next morning would bring answers, but also questions that would take the entire community to unravel. The next morning dawned with chaos. Emily had just stepped onto her front porch for school when she saw Max trotting down the street. Her heart leaped at his return, but something was different. Beside him walked a boy, disheveled and disoriented, whom she recognized immediately as Jake Wilson, the 12-year-old who had been reported missing the previous evening. Police sirens wailed in the distance as neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Jake's clothes were dirty, his dark hair matted with leaves, and he kept one hand firmly gripped in Max's fur, as if the dog was his only anchor to reality. Emily watched as Mrs. Peterson from next door dropped her coffee mug, shattering ceramic across her driveway at the sight. "Someone called the Wilsons," shouted Mr. Roberts from across the street. Within minutes, the quiet suburban morning transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Police cars arrived with flashing lights, followed closely by Jake's father's black SUV, tires screeching as it rounded the corner. David Wilson, Jake's father and the town's celebrated restaurant owner, burst from his vehicle. His usual composed demeanor cracked as he ran toward his son. Jake finally released his grip on Max and collapsed into his father's arms. The gathered crowd fell silent, watching the reunion with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Officer Sarah Martinez, who had led the search efforts, approached carefully. "Jake," she said gently, "can you tell us what happened?" The growing crowd of neighbors pressed closer, straining to hear. Emily edged forward too, worried about both Jake and Max, who remained steadfastly by the boy's side. Jake's voice came out, hoarse but clear. "I was exploring the old Miller property," he admitted, referring to an abandoned estate on the outskirts of town. "I fell into one of the old cellars. Couldn't climb out." He paused, glancing at Max. I thought nobody would find me. But then he appeared. He brought me water in an old plastic bottle he found, and he showed me a way out I couldn't see in the dark." The crowd murmured. Emily noticed how the initial fearsome neighbors showed at Max's appearance had transformed into something else. Mrs. Peterson, who just last week had complained about dangerous breeds at the neighborhood watch meeting, was now looking at the Pitbull with tears in her eyes. Officer Martinez knelt beside Max, examining him with professional interest. "No collar, no chip that we can see. He's obviously been on his own for a while." She turned to Emily. "You said he came to your house yesterday." Emily nodded, stepping forward. "He was hungry and scared. I gave him food and water." She didn't mention breaking the rules about approaching strays. Her mother, standing behind her, squeezed her shoulder supportively. The neighborhood watch committee members, who had been vocal about banning aggressive breeds from the community, now stood in uncomfortable silence. Tom Baker, their leader, cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose we might have been too quick to judge certain breeds," he admitted reluctantly. As paramedics arrived to check Jake's condition, the crowd's attention shifted. Camera phones emerged, capturing the scene. Local news vans began arriving, drawn by police scanner chatter about the missing boy's recovery. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just Jake's rescue. It was how Max stationed himself protectively between the crowd and Jake, maintaining a careful watch while remaining perfectly calm. David Wilson knelt beside Max, his expensive suit collecting dirt. "Thank you," he whispered to the dog, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever you need, food, shelter, medical care, it's yours." Max responded by gently pressing his head against David's hand, displaying a gentleness that seemed to surprise everyone watching. The story spread through the town like wildfire. By lunchtime, local news stations were running the headline, "Heroic Pitbull Saves Missing Boy." Social media exploded with photos and videos of Max, transforming him from a stray to be feared into a local hero. The same community that had recently debated breed-specific legislation was now sharing posts about the intelligence and loyalty of pit bulls. Emily watched it all unfold from her front yard, where she had been allowed to stay home from school due to the excitement. She noticed how people who had previously crossed the street at the sight of a pit bull were now approaching Max with cautious admiration. The dog handled the attention with remarkable patience, though he never strayed far from Jake. What none of them realized yet was that this was just the beginning. Max's rescue of Jake would catalyze a series of events that would uncover deeper truths about their community, about Jake's family, and about Max himself. The simple story of a heroic dog would soon reveal itself to be part of a much larger tapestry, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their peaceful town. As the day progressed and the initial excitement began to settle, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Max. Something in those knowing eyes that suggested this rescue was no accident. She watched as her neighbors transformed from fearful observers to active participants in Max's story, unaware that they were all becoming part of something much bigger than a simple rescue tale. In the days following Jake's rescue, a remarkable transformation took place in the community. Emily, who had always been somewhat of a loner, found herself at the center of an unexpected friendship. Jake began visiting her house daily, ostensibly to see Max, who had temporarily taken up residence in Emily's family's garage, converted into a comfortable shelter with blankets, food, and water. "I've never told anyone this before," Jake confided one afternoon as they sat in Emily's backyard, watching Max explore the garden. "But I've always felt different from everyone else at school." He picked at the grass, avoiding eye contact. "Being the son of a famous chef, everyone expects me to be just like him. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect everything." Emily listened, recognizing the weight of expectations she hadn't known Jake carried. At 12, he seemed older than his years, especially when he spoke about his father's restaurant and the pressure of being the chef's son. Max, sensing the heaviness in Jake's voice, padded over and rested his head on the boy's knee. "I like animals better than most people too," Emily shared, feeling safe enough to voice her own truth. "They don't care if you're different or if you spend your weekends reading about veterinary medicine instead of going to parties." She reached out to scratch behind Max's ears, and the dog's tail wagged contentedly. Their afternoons fell into a comfortable routine. After school, they would meet in Emily's backyard, doing homework while Max lounged nearby. Jake would bring treats from his father's restaurant's kitchen, carefully prepared bits of chicken or beef that Max accepted with gentle manners that continued to surprise everyone. David Wilson began stopping by as well, initially just to check on Jake, but increasingly to spend time with the unlikely trio. Emily noticed how his pristine chef's whites had given way to more casual attire during these visits, and how the stern lines around his mouth softened when he watched his son laugh with Emily. "He's different with you too," David remarked one day, watching Max demonstrate his newfound trick of fetching specific toys by name, a skill that seemed remarkably advanced for a stray. More focused, more purposeful. There was something in his tone that suggested he was noticing more than just the dog's behavior. The friendship between Emily and Jake deepened through their shared care of Max. They discovered common ground in their feelings of being outsiders. Emily with her encyclopedic knowledge of animals, and Jake with his reluctance to follow in his father's culinary footsteps. Max seemed to understand their conversations, offering a paw or nuzzling close whenever their voices carried notes of sadness or frustration. One particularly warm afternoon, as they shared ice cream cones with a small, dog-safe portion for Max, Jake finally spoke about his mother. "She left 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Dad tells everyone she's traveling for work." But he trailed off and Max pressed closer to his side. Emily noticed how the dog's attention never wavered from Jake during these vulnerable moments. Emily found herself sharing her own family stories, about her mother's late-night veterinary emergency calls and her father's quiet support of her dream to work with animals. The more they talked, the more they realized how their seemingly different lives shared common threads of loneliness and the desire to forge their own paths. David Wilson's visits became longer, and Emily noticed how he would watch Max with an intensity that seemed to go beyond mere gratitude for his son's rescue. One evening, as he was leaving, she overheard him on the phone, speaking in low tones about remarkable training and advanced behaviors. The conversation nagged at her, adding to a growing list of questions about their mysterious four-legged friend. Max's presence had changed something fundamental in their daily lives. The dog seemed to have an uncanny ability to anticipate their needs, knowing when to play and when to simply provide silent comfort. He would alert them to approaching visitors before they arrived and seemed to understand complex conversations far beyond what would be expected of even a well-trained dog. As their friendship grew stronger, Emily began to notice subtle patterns in Max's behavior. The way he would guide their conversations with small interventions. A gentle paw when someone was getting upset. A playful bounce when tensions needed breaking. It was as if he was orchestrating something larger than just their daily interactions. Jake, too, began to show signs of change. His previously hunched shoulders straightened, and he spoke more openly about his feelings regarding his father's expectations and his mother's absence. Emily watched as Max worked his gentle magic, somehow helping Jake find the courage to be more authentically himself. What none of them realized yet was that these afternoon sessions in Emily's backyard were laying the groundwork for something much bigger than friendship. Max's presence was carefully weaving together threads of their lives that would soon reveal a pattern none of them could have anticipated, leading to revelations that would challenge everything they thought they knew about coincidence and connection. As spring began to warm into summer, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were all part of something larger than themselves. She watched Max watching them, those intelligent eyes holding secrets she couldn't quite grasp, and wondered what other surprises their remarkable friend had in store for them. The transformation of their small community began with a town hall meeting, hastily organized by the local council to address the growing interest in Max's story. The high school gymnasium filled beyond capacity, with residents spilling out into the hallways. Emily, Jake, and Max sat in the front row, the dog's calm presence drawing curious glances from the assembled crowd. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, her usual businesslike demeanor softened by the occasion. "We're here today to discuss something remarkable that's happened in our community," she began. "What started as a rescue story has become something much more." Behind her, a projector displayed photos of Max, from his first appearance as a struggling stray to recent images showing his gentle interactions with neighborhood children. The statistics presented were compelling. Since Max's arrival, the local animal shelter reported a 200% increase in adoption inquiries, particularly for breeds typically considered difficult to place. The animal control officer, typically overwhelmed with complaint calls about dangerous dogs, now found himself fielding questions about rehabilitation and training programs. When Emily was invited to speak, she approached the microphone with Max padding silently beside her. Her prepared speech lay forgotten in her pocket as she looked out at the sea of familiar faces. "Max taught me something," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He showed us that sometimes the things we fear the most are exactly what we need in our lives." The crowd listened intently as she described how Max had not only saved Jake but had begun to save their community from its own prejudices. "He's not just a hero because he rescued Jake," Emily continued. "He's a hero because he's helping us rescue ourselves from fear and misunderstanding." Jake stepped up next, his father's supportive hand on his shoulder. "Before Max," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "I felt lost in more ways than one. but he showed me that being different isn't something to hide from, it's something to embrace. David Wilson's eyes glistened with unexpected tears as he listened to his son speak publicly for the first time about his struggles. The meeting evolved into an impromptu planning session for community initiatives. Mrs. Peterson, once the neighborhood's most vocal critic of dangerous breeds, now proposed converting her vacant rental property into a temporary shelter for rehabilitating rescue dogs. Tom Baker, the neighborhood watch leader, suggested implementing a community education program about responsible pet ownership. Local business owners stepped forward with offers of support. The hardware store promised materials for building shelter kennels. The grocery store pledged monthly food donations. Even the local veterinary clinic announced a new program offering discounted services for adopted rescue animals. As the meeting continued, Emily noticed something peculiar about Max's behavior. The dog moved through the crowd with purpose, seeming to pay special attention to certain individuals. He would pause briefly beside someone, make eye contact, and move on, almost as if he was selecting people for some unknown purpose. One of these people was Sarah Martinez, the police officer who had been present at Jake's rescue. After Max's interaction with her, she stood up and shared a personal story about her own experiences with rescue dogs in law enforcement. These animals have a capacity for healing that we're only beginning to understand, she said, her professional facade cracking slightly. The energy in the gymnasium shifted as more people began sharing their stories. A veteran spoke about how his service dog had saved him from depression. A teacher described how bringing therapy dogs into her special education classroom had transformed her students' learning experience. Each story seemed to build upon the last, creating a tapestry of understanding that was changing the community's perspective. What nobody could fully articulate was the subtle way Max seemed to be orchestrating these connections. Emily watched as he moved between groups, his presence somehow facilitating conversations that needed to happen. It was as if he understood the complex social dynamics at play and was gently nudging people toward understanding. As the meeting drew to a close, Mayor Thompson announced the formation of a community task force dedicated to animal welfare and adoption advocacy. The initiative would be called Max's Legacy, she declared, to honor the dog who had started it all. The crowd erupted in applause, but Emily noticed Max's attention was focused elsewhere, on a woman standing quietly at the back of the gymnasium. The woman's presence seemed to capture Max's complete attention. Though from Emily's vantage point, she couldn't make out the stranger's features clearly. Before she could point this out to Jake, the woman disappeared into the crowd, leaving Emily with a nagging feeling that another piece of their mysterious puzzle had just presented itself. What none of them realized was that this meeting was just the beginning. The connections being formed, the barriers being broken down, and the changes taking place in their community were part of a larger design, one that Max seemed to understand but had yet to fully reveal. As they left the gymnasium that evening, Emily caught Max watching the sunset with an almost human expression of satisfaction. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything, from his initial appearance in her yard to this community gathering, was unfolding according to some greater plan. The real question was, whose plan was it, and what was its ultimate purpose? Within weeks of the town hall meeting, what began as a local story exploded across social media. A video of Emily and Jake sharing Max's story, filmed by a local news station, went viral overnight. The hashtag #MaxEffect started trending as similar stories of rescue dogs making extraordinary impacts began pouring in from across the country. Emily's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. News outlets from major networks reached out for interviews, and animal rights organizations sought to partner with their growing movement. The quiet life she had known was transformed into a whirlwind of activity, all centered around their remarkable dog. "Look at this," Jake said one morning, showing Emily his tablet. A prestigious animal behavior research team had published a preliminary study on Max's unusual capabilities. The paper noted his extraordinary ability to read human emotions and facilitate social connections, suggesting he possessed intelligence far beyond typical canine cognitive levels. The local animal shelter, overwhelmed by the sudden interest, had to create a waiting list for potential adopters. Director Maria Santos appeared on local television, tears in her eyes as she described how dogs that had been in the shelter for years were finally finding homes. "People are looking past breeds and appearances," she explained. "They're seeing the potential in every animal." David Wilson surprised everyone by transforming part of his restaurant into a pet-friendly space, hosting weekly Dine with Your Dog events that raised money for animal welfare causes. The sight of the formerly uptight chef carefully preparing gourmet dog treats alongside his regular menu became a social media sensation in its own right. But it was the unexpected depth of Max's impact that truly amazed Emily. During a weekend adoption event in the park, she watched as Max methodically moved from family to family, seemingly matching people with specific dogs. A quiet teenager found confidence through a shy German Shepherd. A grieving widow connected with an elderly Labrador. Each pairing felt deliberately orchestrated. "There's something almost supernatural about it," Officer Martinez commented, watching Max work his magic. Emily had noticed the police officer spending more time around their events. Her professional curiosity apparently piqued by Max's unusual behaviors. The movement grew beyond just dog adoption. Local schools introduced programs about empathy and animal care. The city council passed new regulations supporting animal welfare. Even the industrial park on the edge of town was being partially repurposed into a state-of-the-art animal rehabilitation center. Yet, amid all this progress, Emily noticed Max growing increasingly alert, almost anticipatory. He would sometimes stop mid-activity, ears perked, as if listening for something only he could hear. These moments often coincided with glimpses of the mysterious woman from the town hall, who seemed to appear briefly at their events before vanishing into the crowd. One particularly memorable afternoon, during a large adoption event at the park, Emily overheard a conversation that made her pause. Two volunteers were discussing Max's background, mentioning something about a special training program and selected participants. Before she could hear more, Max appeared at her side, gently but firmly, guiding her away from the conversation. Jake, too, had begun noticing peculiarities. Sometimes, he confided to Emily, "I wake up at night and find Max sitting by my window, staring out like he's waiting for something." The dog's behavior, while never threatening, carried an increasing sense of purpose that neither of them could decipher. The media attention brought unexpected challenges. Some skeptics questioned the authenticity of Max's abilities, suggesting elaborate training or even hoaxes. Others tried to capitalize on the movement's success, launching copycat programs that lacked the genuine connection Max fostered. Through it all, Max maintained his gentle, deliberate presence. He seemed unaffected by the cameras and attention, focused instead on what appeared to be his primary mission, though what that mission truly was remained unclear. Emily often caught him watching the horizon with an intensity that suggested he knew something they didn't. The movement's growth brought them international attention. Animal behaviorists, researchers, and media personalities flocked to their small town. Yet Max's most significant impact remained personal. The way he could calm Jake's anxiety with a simple touch. How he knew exactly when Emily needed encouragement. His uncanny ability to appear just when someone needed him most. As summer progressed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching some kind of culmination. Max's behaviors became more focused, his actions more deliberate. The mystery woman's appearances grew more frequent, and Emily noticed how Max would watch her with what seemed like recognition. What they didn't realize was that all of this, the movement, the media attention, the community transformation, was building toward a revelation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about Max and his true purpose in their lives. The real story was just beginning to unfold, and its implications would reach far beyond their small town's borders. Despite the movement's success, opposition began to surface. A group calling themselves Citizens for Responsible Pet Control started holding counter-protests at adoption events. Their leader, Richard Blackwood, a prominent local real estate developer, claimed the town's new animal-friendly initiatives were decreasing property values. "This isn't about one heroic dog," Blackwood announced at a city council meeting. "It's about maintaining standards in our community. These animal rehabilitation centers and shelters are attracting the wrong element." His words caused an immediate uproar, but Emily noticed how some council members nodded subtly in agreement. The pressure began affecting Jake more than anyone. At school, some kids whose parents sided with Blackwood started making comments about his dangerous pet and questioning his story about being rescued. Emily found him one afternoon behind the school, fighting back tears while Max pressed against his leg supportively. "Sometimes I wish none of this had happened," Jake confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad's restaurant is losing customers because of the protesters, and Mum." He trailed off, but Emily noticed how Max's ears perked up at the mention of Jake's mother. The opposition took a more serious turn when anonymous complaints began flooding the health department about David Wilson's dog-friendly dining area. The restaurant was forced to temporarily suspend its popular adoption events, pending multiple inspections. Emily watched the strain grow on Jake's father's face as he dealt with mounting pressures. Max's behavior during this period became increasingly complex. While maintaining his gentle demeanor, he seemed to be working with even greater purpose. Emily caught him several times, leading Jake away from confrontations before they could escalate, or appearing at crucial moments when tensions were highest. One evening, during a particularly heated town council meeting, Blackwood presented documentation suggesting that Max might be connected to a controversial experimental program. "We don't even know where this dog came from," he argued. "For all we know, he could be dangerous." The meeting descended into chaos, but Emily's attention was drawn to Max's reaction. Instead of showing agitation, he remained perfectly calm, his eyes fixed on the back of the room where, once again, the mysterious woman stood watching. This time, Emily was certain she saw the woman nod slightly before disappearing. That night, Jake shared something that added another layer to the mystery. "I found this in Dad's office," he said, pulling out a worn envelope. Inside was a letter dated 3 years ago, mentioning a canine therapy integration program and bearing a logo Emily didn't recognize. Before they could examine it further, Max gently took the envelope and placed it in David's study through the open door. The pressure continued to mount. Protest signs appeared in front yards, opposing the new animal rehabilitation center. The local newspaper ran opinion pieces, questioning the wisdom of changing long-standing pet regulations. Emily's parents began receiving anonymous calls suggesting they were irresponsible for harboring a dog with an unknown background. Through it all, Max's presence remained steadfast, but Emily noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He spent more time watching the streets at night, and his interactions with certain community members became more deliberate, almost as if he was preparing for something. The situation reached a critical point when Blackwood announced plans to develop the land adjacent to the proposed rehabilitation center into a luxury housing complex. "We need to decide what kind of community we want to be," he declared at a press conference. "One that maintains its standards, or one that puts animals before people." That evening, as Emily and Jake sat in her backyard, trying to process the day's events, Max suddenly became alert. His attention focused intensely on the street, and for the first time since they'd known him, he let out a low, urgent bark. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, but Max was already moving, leading them toward the front yard with determined steps. As they rounded the house, they saw a familiar figure standing under the streetlight, the mysterious woman who had been appearing at their events. This time, she didn't disappear. Instead, she stood waiting, holding what appeared to be a folder in her hands. Max sat calmly at attention, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. The woman's presence seemed to carry answers to questions they hadn't even known to ask, and Emily felt a sudden certainty that they were about to discover why Max had really come into their lives. What they couldn't know was that the truth would be more extraordinary than anything they had imagined, and that the real purpose behind Max's appearance in their town was about to be revealed. A purpose that would not only challenge their opponents, but would transform their understanding of the connection between humans and animals forever. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Matthews, her voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. "It's time you learned the truth about Max," she said, glancing at the dog with what looked like professional pride. "But first, there's someone else who needs to be here for this conversation." As if on cue, David Wilson's car pulled into Emily's driveway. Behind it, Officer Martinez's police cruiser parked quietly at the curb. Emily noticed how neither of them seemed surprised to find Dr. Matthews waiting. Max's tail wagged slightly, but he maintained his alert posture. "Dad," Jake's voice carried confusion and a hint of betrayal. "What's going on? Do you know her?" David Wilson's usual confident demeanor wavered. "Son, there's something I've been wanting to tell you about your mother." He looked at Dr. Matthews, who nodded encouragingly. "She didn't just leave us. She's been part of something important." Before he could continue, a third car arrived. As the door opened, Jake gasped. His mother, Alexandra Wilson, stepped out, not disheveled or troubled as Emily had imagined, but professionally dressed and carrying herself with purpose. Max's reaction was immediate. He approached her with familiar respect, receiving a gentle pat on his head. "I think we should all go inside," Dr. Matthews suggested, noting the growing attention from neighbors. Emily's parents, who had been watching from the porch, welcomed everyone into their living room. Max positioned himself in the center, maintaining clear sightlines to all present. Once settled, Dr. Matthews opened her folder. "Max is part of an advanced program combining animal therapy with community rehabilitation," she began. "He's specially trained to identify and support individuals and communities in crisis. But his true gift goes beyond any training we could provide." Alexandra Wilson picked up the narrative, her eyes fixed on her son. "I've been working with the program for the past 3 years. Jake, my disappearance was partly cover for this work, but also," she paused, emotion cracking her professional facade, "I needed help myself. I was struggling with depression, and the program helped me heal." Emily watched as understanding dawned on Jake's face. Max moved to sit beside him, offering silent support as Jake processed this revelation. "But why all the secrecy?" he asked, his voice small. Dr. Matthews explained how the program operated beneath a veil of privacy to protect both the animals and the communities they served. "Max was chosen for your town because we identified several interconnected needs here. Jake's situation, Emily's isolation, the community's brewing tensions around animal welfare. He was trained to help, but what he's accomplished has exceeded our wildest expectations." Officer Martinez spoke up, revealing her own connection. "I've been liaising with the program since Max arrived. We've seen a 40% decrease in juvenile incidents since he began working with the community's young people. It's unprecedented." David Wilson reached for his ex-wife's hand, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by their son. "Your mother and I have been working through our issues," he admitted. "Max helped us realize we were letting our own problems affect you, Jake. We should have been more honest with you from the start." As the adults talked, Emily noticed Max's attention shift to the window. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather. Not protesters this time, but families whose lives had been touched by Max's presence. Among them was Richard Blackwood, standing uncertainly at the edge of the group. Dr. Matthews smiled at the sight. "This is exactly what the program was designed to do: bring communities together, heal invisible wounds, challenge prejudices. Max has a particular talent for it." Alexandra turned to Jake, tears now flowing freely. I wanted to tell you so many times, sweetheart. Watching Max work with you, seeing you grow stronger, it's been both wonderful and heartbreaking. I'm so sorry for not being honest sooner." The evening unfolded into something unexpected, a gathering of truth and reconciliation. As word spread, more people arrived, each with their own story of how Max had impacted their lives. Even Richard Blackwood eventually came inside, sheepishly admitting that his opposition had stemmed from his own unresolved grief over losing his childhood dog to a breed-specific legislation years ago. What struck Emily most was how Max moved through the gathering, still working, still connecting people who needed to talk, still facilitating healing moments. But now she understood the purpose behind his actions. The training that enhanced his natural abilities to sense and respond to human emotional needs. Yet something told her there was still more to learn. As she watched Max guide interactions and comfort those in need, she caught Dr. Matthews watching him with an expression that suggested even she didn't fully understand the depth of Max's capabilities. The program might have given him training, but there was something else at work here. Something that went beyond any human understanding of animal behavior. The gathering continued into the evening, becoming a turning point for the community. But for Emily, it marked the beginning of a deeper mystery, one that would reveal itself in the days to come, challenging everything they thought they knew about the connection between humans and animals. After the gathering dispersed, Dr. Matthews asked Emily, Jake, and his parents to stay. Max sat in the center of the now quiet living room, his presence somehow more profound in the aftermath of the evening's revelations. Emily noticed how he kept glancing between Jake and his mother, as if monitoring their emotional states. "There's more you need to understand," Dr. Matthews began, removing a tablet from her briefcase. "Max isn't just any therapy dog. He's part of a groundbreaking research program that started after we discovered something extraordinary in certain rescue animals." She pulled up a series of brain scans on the tablet. "These are Max's neural patterns compared to typical canines. The differences are remarkable." The images showed areas of heightened activity in regions associated with emotional intelligence and social cognition. "We believe some dogs, like Max, have evolved a unique capacity to understand and influence human emotional states." Alexandra Wilson leaned forward, her professional demeanor returning. "When I joined the program, I was struggling with severe depression after my father's death. Traditional therapy wasn't helping, but working with these dogs," she paused, collecting herself, "they showed me how to reconnect with myself and others. That's when I realized I needed to fix things with my family. But I had to heal myself first." Jake, who had been quietly processing everything, finally spoke. "So all those times Max seemed to know exactly what I needed. When I was upset about Dad's expectations or missing Mum, he actually understood. More than understood," Dr. Matthews confirmed. "Max was specifically chosen for your family because of his unique ability to work with complex family dynamics. But what we didn't anticipate was his extraordinary impact on the broader community." David Wilson cleared his throat. "I received a letter about the program 3 years ago," he admitted, looking at his son. "They wanted to involve our restaurant in a pilot project for animal-assisted therapy. I dismissed it then, but when Max appeared and I recognized the program's logo," he trailed off, the weight of missed opportunities evident in his voice. Emily's mind raced back to all the moments that had seemed too perfect to be coincidence. Max's timely appearances, his subtle interventions, the way he had guided their community toward healing. But why keep it secret? Why not tell everyone about the program? Dr. Matthews's expression grew serious. "Because there are those who would exploit these animals for profit or worse. The program operates quietly to protect both the dogs and the communities they serve. But Max," she paused, studying the dog with obvious amazement, "Max has shown capabilities beyond anything we've documented before." She revealed that Max had been found in an abandoned research facility, along with several other dogs showing similar neural patterns. We believe they were part of an earlier, unauthorized study. Most of the records were destroyed, but what we pieced together suggested they were working with an unprecedented breakthrough in animal cognition. As they talked, Emily noticed Max's behavior changing. He moved to the window, his posture alert but not alarmed. Moments later, they heard footsteps on the porch. Officer Martinez returned, carrying a weathered file box. "We found this during the renovation of the old Miller property," she explained, placing the box on the coffee table. It was hidden in a sealed room in the cellar, the same cellar where Max led Jake. Inside were research notes, dated nearly a decade ago. As Dr. Matthews examined them, her eyes widened. "This is incredible," she breathed. They were studying spontaneous mutations in rescue dogs, animals that had developed enhanced emotional intelligence through trauma and survival. They weren't creating these abilities. They were discovering dogs that had naturally evolved them. Jake looked at Max with new understanding. "Is that why he came to find me? Did he know I was in the cellar because he remembered it?" "We think it's more than that," Alexandra said softly. "Max doesn't just remember, he understands. When he found you, he wasn't just making a rescue, he was closing a circle, helping heal the very place where his journey began." As they discussed the implications of these revelations, Emily watched Max closely. Despite having his background exposed, he remained focused on his work, moving between Jake and his parents when their emotions intensified, offering comfort and support exactly when needed. What none of them realized was that even these revelations were just the surface of a deeper truth, one that would challenge not just their understanding of animal intelligence, but their comprehension of the bonds between all living beings. The real story of Max's origins and his true purpose in their lives was still unfolding. The following morning, Emily woke to find Max missing. Her initial concern turned to panic when she discovered the back gate open, something Max had never done before. Jake arrived minutes later, equally worried, having sensed something was wrong. "He was acting strange last night," Jake said, pacing Emily's backyard. "After everyone left, he kept going to the window, like he was watching for something." Dr. Matthews, who had stayed in town, arrived shortly after being called, her face tense with concern. "This isn't like him," she stated, examining the gate. "Max doesn't wander. Every movement he makes has purpose." She pulled out her phone, quickly organizing search teams with Officer Martinez's help. Within an hour, the community mobilized. The same people who had once feared pit bulls now gathered to search for one. As they combed the neighborhood, Emily noticed something odd about the search pattern Max's tracking device was showing on Dr. Matthews's tablet. "Look," she pointed. "He's not moving randomly. These are deliberate paths, almost like he's creating a pattern." David and Alexandra Wilson arrived together, their shared concern for Max temporarily bridging their remaining awkwardness. The last signal came from near the old Miller property. Officer Martinez reported, her expression troubled. "But there's something else. We found fresh tire tracks behind the building." The search intensified as they approached the old property. Emily spotted signs of recent activity, broken branches, disturbed gravel, and most worryingly, what looked like forced entry into the cellar where Jake had been trapped. "Someone's been here," Officer Martinez confirmed, drawing her flashlight. Recently, the beam revealed fresh footprints in the dust, and something more disturbing, drag marks leading deeper into the cellar. Jake grabbed Emily's arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing to a familiar paw print in the dust. Unlike the chaotic human prints, Max's tracks showed a deliberate path, as if he had been following or leading someone. Dr. Matthews studied the scene with growing alarm. "This wasn't a random disappearance," she concluded. "Max must have detected something or someone. But why come here?" As they ventured deeper into the cellar, Alexandra Wilson's scientific training kicked in. "These marks on the wall," she observed, running her fingers over strange grooves. "They're new, but they match patterns in the old research files. Patterns the dogs used to communicate with each other." The cellar complex proved larger than anyone had realized, with corridors branching off in multiple directions. Emily noticed how the temperature dropped as they went deeper, and the air carried a metallic tang that hadn't been present during Jake's rescue. "There's another level," David Wilson announced, his flashlight beam revealing a hidden stairwell. This wasn't in the building plans. The stairs led to a sealed door, its modern security system jarringly out of place in the old structure. Officer Martinez called for backup while Dr. Matthews examined the door. "This is recent installation," she confirmed. "High-grade security, but..." She paused, noticing something unusual. "Look at these scratches near the keypad." Emily leaned closer. The marks weren't random. They formed a distinct pattern, one she recognized from watching Max communicate with other dogs. "He's leaving us a message," she realized. "He wants us to follow, but he's warning us about something." As if confirming her interpretation, a distant bark echoed through the corridors. Max's distinctive voice, but with an urgency they'd never heard before. Jake started toward the sound, but his mother held him back. "Wait," Alexandra cautioned, studying the security panel. "These marks, they're not just messages, they're coordinates." Her fingers flew over the keypad, inputting numbers based on the scratch patterns. To everyone's amazement, the door clicked open. Beyond lay a sight that stopped them in their tracks. A modern laboratory, humming with active equipment. Monitors displayed data streams and camera feeds, showing other parts of the facility. But what caught their attention was the central display, a map showing dozens of locations across the country, each marked with a pulsing dot. "Oh my God," Dr. Matthews breathed. "These are all locations with dogs like Max. Someone's been tracking them, studying them in secret." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one extraordinary dog, but an entire network of them. Another bark echoed, closer now, followed by the sound of running feet. Max appeared at the far end of the lab, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came the sound of pursuit, and his posture made it clear. He had led them here deliberately, but now they were all in danger. The truth about Max and his origins was about to be revealed, but with it came a threat none of them had anticipated. As alarms began to blare through the facility, they realized they had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than they could have imagined. Max bounded toward them, his movements precise and purposeful. Behind him, shadows moved in the corridor, people in dark clothing, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. But instead of running from them, Max turned to face them, positioning himself between the approaching figures and his group. "Don't move," a voice commanded from the darkness. Then, unexpectedly, another familiar voice responded. "Lower your weapons. They're already here," just as he planned. The lights flickered on fully, revealing Richard Blackwood standing beside a woman in a lab coat. But it was the expression on his face that surprised them. Not menace, but profound relief. "Dr. Matthews," he nodded. "Right on schedule, just as Max calculated." "Calculated," Emily whispered, watching as Max's posture relaxed, his tail wagging slightly at Blackwood's appearance. Dr. Matthews stepped forward, her eyes wide with understanding. "The opposition, the protests. You were testing the community's resolve," she said to Blackwood. And Max knew, he knew all along. The woman in the lab coat introduced herself as Dr. Helen Chen, the original architect of the program that had created Max. Not created, she corrected herself, seeing their expressions. "Discovered. What we found was something extraordinary. Dogs that had developed abilities we couldn't explain. Max isn't just intelligent, he's part of an evolutionary leap." The monitors around them displayed data that told an incredible story. The dogs in the program, all rescues like Max, had developed neural networks that mirrored human emotional centers. But Max had gone further. He had learned to orchestrate complex social interactions, to heal psychological wounds, and most incredibly, to predict and plan for future events. "The property development threats, my protests," Blackwood explained. "They were part of a controlled study. Max needed to prove that a community could overcome its prejudices. The people could change when given the chance to connect with animals in a meaningful way. Alexandra Wilson moved closer to the displays, her scientific training helping her grasp the implications. The program wasn't just about helping communities, she realized. It was about proving that animals could guide human emotional evolution. Jake looked at Max with new understanding. That's why you chose our town, because we needed to learn these lessons. Max's response was to walk to a particular monitor and paw at the screen. Dr. Chen quickly typed in commands, bringing up a series of predictions Max had apparently made months ago about Jake's rescue, about the community's transformation, even about this very moment. He didn't just help us, Emily breathed. He orchestrated everything. My finding him, saving Jake, the community changes. It was all carefully planned to bring us here, to this understanding. Dr. Matthews sat heavily in a nearby chair. We thought we were running the program, she said softly. But Max and the others, they've been guiding us all along, showing us what's possible when we open ourselves to deeper connections with animals. The truth about Max's disappearance became clear. He had led them here deliberately, choosing this moment to reveal the full scope of what he and the other dogs in the program represented. They weren't just therapy animals, they were pioneers of a new kind of relationship between humans and animals. As they absorbed these revelations, Max moved among them, touching each person in turn: Emily, Jake, his parents, Dr. Matthews, even Blackwood. His eyes held that same knowing look they'd seen from the beginning, but now they understood its true meaning. So what happens now? Jake asked, his hand resting on Max's head. Dr. Chen smiled. That depends on all of you. Max has proven that his methods work, that animals can help heal human communities in ways we never imagined. The question is, are you ready to help spread this understanding to others? Emily looked at Max, remembering that first meeting at her gate. You knew, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing, right from the start. Max's tail wagged once, decisively. He moved to the center of the room and sat, looking at each of them in turn. In his eyes, they could see not just intelligence, but wisdom. The wisdom to know that some truths had to be experienced to be believed, that some lessons could only be learned through love and connection. The facility's machines hummed quietly as they stood together, human and canine, at the threshold of something new. The story that had begun with a lost dog and a lonely girl had become something much more a testament to the extraordinary bonds possible between species, and a promise of what those bonds might yet become. As dawn broke outside, casting long shadows through the facility's windows, they understood that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Max had shown them a path forward, one where the boundaries between human and animal consciousness might blur, where healing could flow in both directions, and where the future would be shaped by understanding that transcended species. Max stood, shaking himself, as if to signal the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. His work in their small town was complete, but his larger mission, and now theirs, was just beginning. The truth had been revealed, but the real adventure lay ahead, sharing this knowledge with a world that desperately needed to understand the deeper connections possible between all living beings. And Max, as always, would lead the way.